The spring of 2025 marked a turning point for the Indian subcontinent, as a devastating terrorist attack near Pathankot left over 80 dead and shattered any illusion of stability. The Indian government, under immense public pressure, launched Operation Sindoor within 72 hours, a sweeping campaign of airstrikes, special forces, and cyber warfare deep inside Pakistani-administered territory. This was no limited strike. It was a bold shift from restraint to preemptive action, signaling a new, aggressive doctrine. The world watched in alarm as two nuclear-armed rivals edged closer to war. The United Nations Security Council convened, but divisions among major powers rendered it powerless. China condemned India's actions while Russia tried to mediate, and the US called for calm. None could halt the escalation. Then, India announced the partial suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, threatening to restrict the Chenab River's flow. Water, more vital than any weapon, became a new front in the conflict. Pakistan, already water scarce, called it an act of hydroaggression and a violation of international law. The crisis now spanned military, diplomatic, and environmental fronts, plunging the region into a perfect storm. The subcontinent teetered on the edge, with the world holding its breath. At the heart of the 2025 crisis was the security dilemma, a cycle where each side's defensive moves are seen as threats by the other. India's Operation Sindoor, meant to deter future attacks, was viewed by Pakistan as outright aggression and a prelude to invasion. Pakistan responded by mobilizing its military and activating asymmetric networks, moves India saw as proof of continued hostility. Each action reinforced the other's fears, making miscalculation and escalation almost inevitable. The tragedy, neither side truly wanted war, but both felt compelled to act. In this environment, it's nearly impossible to distinguish between defense and offense. Missile systems and troop movements meant for deterrence looked like preparations for attack. Decades of mistrust and history made every gesture suspect, every move a step up the escalation ladder. The security dilemma turned fear into a self-fulfilling prophecy. The region was trapped in a spiral with no easy way out. Neorealism explains the 2025 crisis as a struggle for survival in an anarchic world. States, lacking a global authority, seek power to ensure their security. India's Operation Sindoor was a calculated assertion of military dominance, aiming to reshape the regional balance. Pakistan, unable to match India conventionally, relied on nuclear deterrence and alliances, especially with China, to balance the scales. Both sides acted rationally within this logic, prioritizing survival over cooperation. International institutions like the UN were sidelined, powerless against the interests of great powers. The Security Council's paralysis reflected not institutional failure, but the clashing priorities of its members. For India and Pakistan, only strength seemed to guarantee safety. In this world, survival trumped all other considerations. India's suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty in April 2025 escalated the crisis beyond the battlefield. The IWT, a rare symbol of cooperation, suddenly became a weapon. By threatening the flow of the Chenab River, India targeted Pakistan's agricultural lifeline without firing a shot. For Pakistan, this was existential. Water scarcity became a new front in the conflict. The move shattered decades of resource diplomacy, showing that even the strongest treaties can be sacrificed for security. The international community, led by the World Bank, warned of humanitarian disaster. The crisis highlighted how climate change and water scarcity could turn rivers into future flashpoints. The weaponization of water was a stark warning for the world. Liberal institutionalism argues that organizations like the UN and World Bank can foster peace, but the 2025 crisis exposed their limits. The UN Security Council was paralyzed by great power rivalries. China shielded Pakistan, the US hesitated to alienate India. Regional bodies like SAARC were silent, crippled by India-Pakistan hostility. Economic ties, touted as deterrence, were too weak to outweigh nationalism and security fears. When survival and honor were at stake, institutions and trade gave way to confrontation. The crisis showed that institutions only work when there's political will. In South Asia, deep-seated rivalry poisoned cooperation. Economic interdependence was no match for existential threats. The liberal vision faltered in the face of hard realities. Constructivism reveals how ideas, history, and identity fueled the 2025 crisis. India and Pakistan's rivalry is not just about territory. It's a product of decades of narratives, symbols, and mutual suspicion. Kashmir lies at the heart of these identities. For Pakistan, unfinished business. For India, an inseparable part of the nation. The terror attack and Operation Sindoor were interpreted through these lenses, making compromise nearly impossible. National honor and historical grievance drove public sentiment and policy. Each side saw itself as the victim, the other as the villain. Resolving the conflict requires more than negotiation. It demands a shift in identity and narrative. Without this, peace remains elusive. The 2025 crisis played out on a global stage, shaped by the ambitions of major powers. China, Pakistan's steadfast ally, shielded it diplomatically while quietly urging restraint to protect its own interests. The US, balancing ties with both countries, pushed for de-escalation but was seen as favoring India. Russia offered to mediate, seeking stability and influence in the region. The Gulf states, with economic stakes in both countries, used their leverage to urge calm. Each power acted to protect its own interests, sometimes fueling the crisis, sometimes seeking to contain it. The conflict became a test of shifting alliances in a multipolar world. Regional disputes were inseparable from global rivalries. The actions of these powers could either ignite or extinguish the flames. In 2025, their interventions were a mix of both. The subcontinent's fate was tied to the moves of distant capitals. Nuclear weapons loomed over every decision in 2025. Mutually assured destruction kept all-out war at bay, but also emboldened both sides to take risks, believing conflict would stay below the nuclear threshold. This stability-instability paradox made limited strikes and skirmishes more likely. The danger, a miscalculation, technical error, or rogue action could trigger uncontrollable escalation. Pakistan's doctrine of tactical nuclear use raised fears of a rapid spiral to catastrophe. With both militaries on high alert, the risk of accidental war soared. Nuclear deterrence was both a brake and an accelerator, preventing war, but making the path to it more perilous. The world watched, hoping the line would not be crossed. The 2025 crisis ended, but the roots of conflict remain. Returning to the old status quo is not enough. The next crisis could be worse. India and Pakistan must restore direct, sustained dialogue beyond public posturing to address terrorism, territory, trade, and water. Back-channel communications should be institutionalized to manage future flare-ups. The Indus Waters Treaty must be reaffirmed and modernized, with the World Bank playing a stronger role. New regional frameworks for cooperation on climate, health, and disaster management could build trust. Great powers must recognize their rivalries fuel instability and use their influence to support peace, not division. The 2025 crisis was a wake-up call, a warning of how close the world came to disaster. The challenge now is to learn, rebuild, and choose diplomacy over confrontation. The future of millions depends on forging a new path to peace.